Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I had a subscriber ask a question which I will flip in here for you guys, and he's saying, hey, how should people who are half natty train? You know, half natty meaning not guys using a ton of gear and not guys who are totally clean and natty, but half natty. And all you guys know about half natty, Matt Ogus calls himself half natty. How should they train? Should they train differently than other people? What do they do? What's optimal? So let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing, work on skilling up my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this half natty training. All right, guys, here's the problem we run into. Everyone talks about the dark side, and what they don't understand is that they think that there's some magical line that you cross, meaning that when you're natural and drug-free, things work specifically a certain way, and when people go on gear, it's all the same for everybody on gear. What they don't understand is that there are basically two spectrums on the natty versus not natty scale. You need to think of it as a spectrum with two ends. One end, someone who's 100% natural, never used gear, no intention of ever using gear, never going to use gear. That's full natty bra. Although many guys who call themselves full natty bra are probably somewhere further in the middle, but I digress. And then the other end of the spectrum are the mega dosers. Guys using 2, 3, 4 more grams of gear, maybe throwing HGH in, all sorts of stuff. Most people who use stuff are somewhere further down the scale. In fact, the majority are down on this end of the scale, almost near the full natty bras. They're not that far off comparative if you consider this to be the other end of a spectrum as far as hormone levels in your body, because naturals have a certain hormone range. Half natties might be on the edge of that range over here, and then it's a sliding scale all the way up to where guys are using 40 times the therapeutic dose. All right, they got 40 times what a natty has in their system. That's the other end of the spectrum. When you compare, there are a lot of people with 1.5, 2, maybe 3 times what a natty has in their system. That's a massive difference between the other end of the scale, and you've got to understand it from that perspective. Now, as far as training and stuff goes, you know what? Gear basically gives people a margin of error. That's what it does. Someone who wants maximum gains drug-free doesn't have a lot of margin of error. They have to get everything right almost all the time, all right? Or else it's gonna cost them some gains. It is, let's be honest here, it is harder to train natty. And I know guys on gear will talk about, no, it's not, because we push ourselves so much harder, we do this. No. That's bullshit, guys. It is harder for natties to train. You know why? Because natties don't have drugs that automatically put muscle on them between the training, outside of training. Drugs will put muscle on you even if you sit on your ass all day long and don't lift shit. That is a proven scientific fact. That is not even up for debate. There's a dozen studies showing that people who lift weights, who quit lifting and go on gear, keep gaining muscle. All right, people who've been training who just stop and go on the needle and sit on the couch, keep gaining muscle. All right, that is a proven, undeniable fact. And there are plenty of studies confirming that. It's proven fact. In fact, when they're used medically for people who are burn patients and stuff, they're sometimes in beds in comas still gaining muscle. All right, people have been in an ICU unit in a fucking coma who gained 40 pounds of muscle. I can assure you, when you're in a coma, you're not even wiping your own ass. All right, you're doing no movement. They gain muscle. Think about that. The natties don't have that kind of margin of error. They don't have margins of error in their recovery. They don't have margins of error in their muscle protein synthesis uptime. It is harder. When drugs come into the mix, there is a dose-dependent response. And even in the half natty doses, all right, we've got studies on that. Half natties can gain little bits of muscle without even touching a weight. So what does that mean as far as their training goes? Do they have to get their training timing perfect? No. Because they're going to gain a little muscle even when their body isn't responding to the training. It isn't adapting to the training. They gain a little bit of muscle. It's a dose-dependent amount. So what that means is you have a lot of margin of error. The more gear people go on, the less they have to care about getting perfect training frequency for muscle protein synthesis. Their recovery improves a little bit in a dose-dependent response. So people who are half natty will recover a little better. But you know what? That's a big myth too, that it's a limitless recovery. Oh, anyone on gear can just go train for hours and hours and hours. That's not true. What ends up happening, the guys who train for hours and hours are doing fluff and pump. All right, they're coming in and doing 20 sets of cable movements. That's not training for hours and hours. That's fucking around. That's what Martin Berkhan called fuck arounditis. Doing the stuff that won't get drug-free lifters big at all. So does it really count? If it won't make you really grow that fast if you're natural, does it really count as training? I would say no. Now you go take these guys who are on 2 grams of gear, you go have them do 5 or 6 or 8 sets of heavy deadlifts with a weight that's challenging for them, and you watch how long it takes them to recover. Think they can come do that 3 days a week? Think they can do high volume deadlifting 3 days a week with 85% of their max? Think they can do AMREPs with 85% of their max 3 times a week, 4 times a week? I promise you they can't. It's not limitless recovery. It's limitless recovery from little fluff bullshit. But here's the way it works. Drugs enhance recovery. Testosterone increases recovery. All these anabolics increase recovery. That's what they do. However, it's a dose-dependent response and it's a workload-dependent response. Meaning, what do we talk about with people becoming more advanced as lifters? They're able to generate higher workloads that they can no longer recover from. Right? So let's say that people's gear dose gives them a 50% increase in recovery, because that's a good way to look at it. It's going to be a linear type increase. The amount of gear a half natty's on might give him 40 or 50% better recovery. What that basically means is that he can push himself 40 or 50% harder in the gym to get the same recovery time for his muscles and everything that the natty has. That's what that means. So you've got to look at that in terms of tonnage. Well, the thing is, if the guy is on gear, what happens? He gets stronger, he gains muscle. That also means he generates more tonnage per set, because if he's deadlifting 400 pounds for 5 reps and he gets stronger on gear and gets to 500 pounds for 5 reps, that's a 25% increase in workload per set. That means that he can get closer in every set that he does to reaching his maximum recoverable fatigue even on the drugs. So there reaches a threshold very quickly to where the people on gear get bigger and stronger, and they will actually create the ability to eventually outwork their recovery with the same number of sets. So when it comes to total reps and sets, they can very quickly reach a point to where they get strong enough to hit their recovery limit just like a natural can, because they're moving more tonnage in the workout. Because they're bigger and stronger, they start moving 50% more tonnage. They've only got a 50% increased recovery ability. They're right back where they were as a natty in terms of recovery at that point. People confuse guys who do a bunch of fluff and pump with actual real training and tonnage when they're talking about the recovery. They do enhance recovery, but they also enhance your ability to tap into and reach your recovery limits. So there's a catch-22 there. Now, obviously, that's not a real catch-22 because you got bigger and stronger. That was the whole goal. That was the point. So what you have to look at in terms of training, there's no optimal training. What that basically means is that the more gear that people use, the more leeway they have in training style, the more margin of error they have in training style while maintaining near maximum gains. That's what that actually means. And it also means that they are less dependent upon their actual training for their muscle mass, because people who go on gear have a dose-dependent muscle response. Now, the bigger they get, the same thing, diminished returns. It's harder to gain muscle the more muscle you have, so they will eventually reach a threshold to where the gear stops putting muscle on them at a given dose. It will stop. But if they increase the amount, it will increase again, but it will also help them maintain the amount they had between training. So then the training itself gives them a little bloop. But there is a point to where obviously they stop gaining muscle from the gear when they reach a certain size, and then they're just going back to what their training is stimulating a bit, but the gear helps them hold on to everything. They're still going to be a lot bigger than they were natty. So it's an interesting dynamic. People are looking for an optimal way to train when they're on gear, and what I would say is you don't. A half natty can basically just train like he did when he's natty. In fact, I would recommend people who are on TRT doses from their doctor People who use in moderate amounts, to just train like you would if you're natural. Don't go on a body part split. There's no need to do any of that. Save that for the guys who are on massive amounts. I would say the half natty could train just like he did when he's natural, other than remember that they've got a little bit of leeway in their recovery. They can probably do a little more volume and recover from it. They can choose to do a little more frequency and recover from it, or they can choose to do a little less frequency and keep growing anyways, because the substances themselves increase their muscle protein synthesis between workouts a little bit anyways. What it does, it gives wiggle room. But as far as making major changes for people who choose to go on something versus people who are natty, I don't think they need to make major changes in their training. They can train essentially the same way. Just remember that they have a little bit of wiggle room on recovery, a little bit of wiggle room on frequency, a little bit of wiggle room on volume before they're outside of using good training again. All it does is give them a bigger margin of error. They can get a few more things wrong and keep making fantastic progress from their training. That's what it does in terms of training. I wouldn't recommend that the half natty really change anything major at all. Just train like you did when you were natty. Maybe use a little more volume or a little more frequency. And that's how I would approach it. That's how I would recommend it. And people need to remember, these things work on a spectrum. It is a wide spectrum, and there's a lot of points in between. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.